I would like to continue to share a few things garnered from this little gem of a book that Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archives published. That is a number of talks that Lama Yeshe gave in Australia in 1975. And from what it says here, he had been teaching Western students for about 10 years. They ended up showing up in Kopan in the mid-60s, probably some of them leaving the United States due to the Vietnam War, but there was also Australians and Europeans and folks like that. So they found Lama Yeshe in Kopan in Kathmandu, Nepal. So by the time he gets to giving these teachings in 1975, he's got a pretty good idea about the Western student's mind. And what I'm finding out in this book is that some of the things he taught them for so many years that he could really hone in on some of the issues that they were dealing with their Dharma practice and how they were trying to work with their minds just because of the culture. And that he would address so many of them that were very simple but in very profound ways. And I found that even now, 40 years later, a lot of what he addresses really resonates in my mind, some of the difficulties that I feel that I have come up with and still continue to come up with in my Dharma practice. So in the first chapter, remember he said after about that first 10 years, his students kept coming back and going, "Lama, why are you always teaching all this negative stuff? Why can't you say something nice about life?" And what, Lama was doing, he was teaching them the Four Noble Truths. He was teaching them the first two Noble Truths about, this is the state of our minds, this is our current situation, and these are the causes. And that he had also said that until we know both the positive and negative of our own minds, we're going to be very, very confused on what the causes of those kind of minds are, and also what to be able to abandon and what to cultivate. And if we only look at the good stuff, when the agitated or the afflicted mind comes up, if we can't identify sort of what's the flavor of the mind and what's triggering it, that will be more inclined to either suppress it, distract it, or push it away. So he really wanted to kind of reassure them that it was getting a balanced, holistic sense of the mind, and that the Buddha, being an extremely skillful teacher, would address his disciples and whoever came to meet him he would almost have these diagnostic tools in his own mind to be able to meet whoever came to him, whatever predispositions they had, but he was very much into teaching them how to work with the minds that they had at the moment to be able to transform them. So Lama was trying to put it in a bigger context for them. I think that was one of the main things. Once again, we have to remember that a lot of these teachings were for his Western students, and that's why I resonate so much. Then in the second chapter, he addresses a topic called spirituality and materialism. All right, the ultimate contradiction, right? He called it a vast topic with countless points of view. And what his question was, are they irreconcilable differences? Are they so opposite that you can't be spiritual and be materialistic at the same time, or you can't be materialistic and be spiritual at the same time? And from what I can garner, he doesn't actually set a definition of materialism. He goes into giving all the things that we've thought about that. But it's like being spiritual, having some kind of spiritual practice or path, and materialism is having just the basic state of existence, living in everyday life, dealing with all of the difficulties, all the challenges, making a living, having relationships. So materialism is being in the world in a very personal, clear kind of way. And then, so he kind of presents some of the misconceptions that he was hearing at that time on what people thought materialism was or what people thought spirituality was. So I wanted to, and see if they're still true today, even 40 years later. Okay, so the first one, which I had to laugh at because I think we've heard this up here at the Abbey. Some people think that those who seek the spiritual path do so because they failed at the material one. They just couldn't make the grade. They couldn't live in society. They're escaping. They didn't know how to deal with keeping a job and having relationships and being married. So we're basically people who want to escape. Okay, so he said that's the first misconception about folks who are spiritual. He doesn't go about, counteracting them with his own thinking, but it comes across in a very kind of a more general sort of way. Another misconception, he says, is that to be spiritual, you have to abandon all material comforts. You cannot be spiritual and be materialist. You can't enjoy both of them at the same time. And what he says about this is, this way of thinking, he says, is very common amongst the people of Earth. If it's this, it can't be that, and if it's that, it can't be this. He said, very extreme thinking. And I had to laugh because a few weeks ago we had some things going on with training at the Abbey here, and Venerable said, this community is so extreme. You're just a bunch of extremists. You go from one end of the ditch to the other. She says, what we're looking for is down the middle way. So here he is saying that people on earth have this kind of, it has to be all or nothing. Okay, the third misconception, if a spiritual person is wealthy, people say you can't be wealthy, you're supposed to be spiritual. That somehow wealth is equated with degeneration or some kind of evil world experience. And then the last one is that, another one, it says, if you're a spiritual person, you have to be a believer. You've got to believe in something. I, however, don't believe in anything, so I don't have a spiritual path. I have nothing to believe in. I've got no baggage. I've got no spiritual dogma going on. And he just laughed and he says, some of these folks many times have a lot more beliefs than any spiritual or religious person. And he says, anytime that you're attached to an idea, anytime that you're attached to a material thing, or projections of what you perceive as good or bad, is a belief. He says, he said, I don't believe that there's anybody in the world that doesn't have a belief, that doesn't believe in anything or nothing. He says it's impossible because you live in the world and you're going to have some sort of feeling, some sort of beliefs or ideals about what you perceive is going on. And then on page, so then he gets into, then he goes on to say that he knows people who are very materialistic in their spirituality, that they meet some spiritual path and they say, this is incredible, I'm going to become a Buddhist. And just because you really like some of the ideas you hear, you think that you're a Buddhist even though you don't understand and you haven't practiced it yet. It's just there's something about it just really inspires you and you just get on board and you're just totally into it. He's going for the balance. He's going for the middle way here, folks. So, I can see in my mind a little bit of, he's talking about me. So here's as close as it got on page 15 in here on what he said spirituality was. Spirituality isn't just an idea. It's a basic philosophy of life that through our own personal experience relates beneficially to our basic personal makeup and disposition. So it really resonates. So it's just a philosophy of life that resonates with some of the fundamental goodness, the fundamental values that we have in our life. And that when we practice them, they benefit us. That's what he said is what spirituality or a religious path is. He says it's not about becoming infatuated with ideas and then going to the extreme where you make radical changes in your everyday life. He says that's impossible. You can't make that kind of shift, getting on board, falling in love with some kind of philosophies or ideas about a spiritual path, and then just totally like going to the opposite. Stop answering the phone, giving away all your possessions, stop talking to your families, give away, just go up to a cave somewhere is basically what he's saying. He says you can only change your mind gradually. And to realize the Dharma, you have to start where you are and base any practice you do on that foundation. Which is then I thought about, because Venerable was one of his students, and I said, how much of what Lama Yeshe taught her does she really integrate into life here? And that's why we have as part of our guidelines here is that when folks want to come, all of us did this, that we came a little bit, and then we thought about it, went home, and then we come back again, and we stay a little bit longer. It's a very gradual process of seeing whether this kind of community or monastic life or the Dharma really works. We've had a few people actually show up here with suitcases. They haven't called or anything. They just come with a suitcase and say, I'm here. I want to join the community. I want to ordain. We don't even know who they are. People drive down the road and leave them here with their suitcases at their front door. But he said to And then he uses this word a lot about hallucinating. To abandon your basic nature and try to change yourself according to some fantastic idea as if you were changing your clothes. That's hallucinating. Too extreme. So once again, evidently who he's teaching in these audiences back then, he's getting a sense that there's this kind of idealism and then there's this kind of depression. There's up and down, flip-flopping. And I'm only in the second chapter of the book, but what I'm getting a sense is he's talking about something very specifically of what he's gathering from these students that he has. And he says there is no right answer on what is the nature of spirituality and what is the nature of materialism. And it's because we all think differently, we have different experiences, and how either of those two paths work for each other. He says, but the whole point is to really have a balanced approach. So I wanted to read the last of this. Is really quite lovely. Therefore, take the middle way as much as you possibly can. Avoid the extreme of thinking, I am spiritual, clinging tightly to that idea, hallucinating by imagining what you think a spiritual life should be, and then neglecting the basic nature of your everyday life. I'm enjoying my spiritual life so much that I don't even want to make a cup of tea. Like we just totally go to the opposite side of our thinking. Here, he says, because there isn't a balance in our everyday life of relationship and work and livelihood and, keeping a roof over our heads, and this spiritual basic philosophy of trying to find something that deeply resonates with our hearts and minds and benefits us, he says, if there's no harmony between your so-called spiritual life and the demands of your everyday existence, you're going to run into trouble. If you're really pursuing a spiritual life, there would be more harmony and better cooperation between those two aspects of your life if you were truly living your spiritual life in a balanced way and truly living your material life in a balanced way. A barrier between the two means there's something wrong with what you're calling your spiritual path. Instead of being open to the world around you, you're closed. Therefore, communication is difficult. If the religion you are practicing is a true path, and give satisfactory answers to your dissatisfied mind, you should be better than ever dealing with your everyday life and living like a decent human being. Living by dry, hallucinated ideas is not realistic. That way you can't even get to your breakfast. Like we're just so obsessed with getting to awakening and to being perfect. So he says to really check carefully to see that what you are really understanding about your religious practice is true. You may find that it needs a lot of correction. So, and that the Buddha, everything the Buddha said, his entire philosophy, all that he taught, was the purpose of penetrating to the essence of our being, of realizing the nature of the human mind. He never said we just had to believe what he taught. Instead, he encouraged us just to try and understand. So my little summary here is, and I think that there's a danger sometimes when we meet a spiritual path, because when I first met it, I was totally evangelical. I was totally over the top. I had very little wisdom, very little Dharma understanding, and I was just berating all of my friends about why they weren't Buddhists. It really, because on one hand, there's a very deep connection in our minds about the Dharma, but yet we can't get zealous about it to the extent of throwing our whole life out of balance. So he says to check it out. Is it the thought of being a spiritual practitioner that attracts us? Maybe a new identity. Or is it the personal life experience of growth, wisdom, and compassion in a way that personally resonates? So he closes it by saying it's gradual, realistic, personal, and about everyday life. So I think that this is trying to temper, once again, this, either or, all or nothing kind of extreme thinking, at least I know as a Westerner have, and that we don't have to give up, sacrifice everything. That there's got to be a balance on what our spiritual path does for us, and at the same time be able to live, even here at the Abbey. We've got everyday things to do. We've got structure, we've got guidelines, we've got practice, we've got our offering service, we've got our visits, we've got responsibilities, it's like to not throw that all out with the bathwater, but to integrate the Dharma in our everyday life here, whether you're a lay person or whether you're a monastic, whether you're a teacher, whether you're a parent, to really hold to the middle way as far as connecting with our spiritual life and being happy with what we do. And the next time I go, we'll talk a little bit about, he's got a little bit of an emptiness meditation that makes sure that we don't fall once again to the extreme. So I'll continue with it next time that we